a stand. This is just saying in our oversight plan, let us make
the gentlelady for the clarification such as it was, but there's nothing to prevent you from advocating the notion that we should look at North Carolina's voter ID plan because some study that you just cited or somebody's article said something about the very notion of its existing harmed voter turnout. I can tell you this, the people of North Carolina overwhelmingly disagree with you. They think it's common sense. And I yield back.
Call the question.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's set the record straight. The American people realize that when Donald Trump claimed that the election had been stolen from him, that caused a raft of legislative proposals in states across the country that resulted in restrictions on the ability of people to vote. So it was all based on the big lie. And these states went into action to curtail the ability of people to vote. Now, I've heard it said this morning that, or I've heard it said just a minute ago that the vote in Georgia was at record numbers, and that's true. Record numbers of people have moved to Georgia, and but the Republicans in control of the Georgia legislature, both the House and Senate, and also the governor's office and the Secretary of State, all they wanted to do was just shave off a number of those votes that would allow them to be able to retain their majority. And so they passed laws that enabled them to do. And yes, it was a record turnout, but there should have been greater turnout had more voters been able to get to the polls. What they did, they enacted not voter ID laws, but they enacted a law that made it illegal to give folks food and water at the polling place. People standing in line for hours, and you've seen that on TV in Georgia. People standing in line for hours trying to exercise that right to vote. And it was not in the white communities where people were standing in line. It was in the black communities for some reason.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'll yield.
Wasn't the factor in long voting lines in minority communities the fact that local government had shut a lot of polling?
To shut down polling places, to move polling places, to consolidate polling places, to make it harder to vote. And guess what? This United States Supreme Court in the Alabama case, when it eviscerated Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act and neutered Section 4, black literature, prohibit teaching black history, and ban discussions about slavery or its continuing effects on American society. These discussions are vital for all of our students to understand their history. The problem is that the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, has found an issue that divides Americans. ALEC, which is a corporate bill mill that spews out model legislation to state and local Republican legislators, has found an issue that they can use to get Republicans elected who will pass legislation that promotes corporate interest. Turn the white people of Palestine, Ohio against the black people of Flint, Michigan. Get the whites to vote Republican, and Republicans then promote deregulation so that corporations can spew poison and pollute our environment while making trillions of dollars in profits, which they don't have to pay taxes on, leaving the cleanup costs to the voters who put them in. And our children are left crippled by being deprived of an honest account of our nation's history.
Okay, James. We'll go with Mike.
Recently, Florida passed its Stop Woke Act, which forbids schools from sharing materials with students regarding race, diversity in schools or workplaces. particularly anything that discusses privilege or oppression based on race. The president of the Florida Education Association estimated that a third of the state's counties had been instructed to cover up their bookshelves because they didn't know which of their books were allowed under this new Florida law. Since January of 2021, 35 states have introduced 137 bills limiting what schools can teach with regards to race, American history, and other such topics. Over 87 of those bills are from this year alone. These restrictive laws have been passed in 10 states. ALEC has been quite busy, and those corporations that underwrite ALEC's racism and those Republicans who support ALEC legislation and introduce it and vote for it should be ashamed of themselves. The prohibitions under these bills, like the ones pushed by Ron DeSantis, are sweeping. One proposed law in South Carolina, for instance, bans teachers from discussing any topic that creates, quote, discomfort, guilt, or anguish, end quote, on the basis of a political belief, which will force teachers to second guess whether they can teach about racism at all. In 2021, a measure passed the Texas House that would limit teacher-led discussions of current events. And in New Hampshire, a local group has offered a $500 bounty to catch teachers who break a state law prohibiting certain teachings about racism. After uproar from Florida's Department of Education and the Education Commissioner, the College Board changed its AP African American Studies curriculum, removing any discussions of Black Lives Matter and purging the names of many Black writers and scholars. This will affect not only Florida students, but students all over. Authoritarian regimes target institutional educators in an effort to drive out free thinking and to stop people from knowing and critically assessing their history. These repressive bills are trying to do just that, and we cannot stand for that in a democracy. And if you support liberty, freedom, and justice for all, you will support this amendment. And with that, I ask for my brothers and sisters' support for this amendment, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman who seeks recognition. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, as the chair of this subcommittee on the Constitution and limited government, I'll just give you the simple reason that I oppose Mr. Johnson's amendment. In this section, Part 2 of the plan that we are considering today, we were by design very limited in the language. There's just a very simple, often one sentence, sometimes one phrase description of the various topics that we'll cover. And so I think that what Mr. Johnson is concerned about, anything conceivably that he would be concerned about under this category, is already well covered by the broad language here. And let me tell you specifically what I mean. Under this paragraph, the freedom of speech, it says that we're going to examine restraints on free speech. It gives some illustrative examples about colleges and universities limiting protest and speech and distribution of literature and other expressive activities, because that is widely regarded in a wide body of litigation and news stories and public reports and polling to be a big growing problem in the country. That's the only reason that one's listed. If we go down under this subcategory and list more and more illustrative examples of things, again, we'll be here for days, because we'll have to add pages and examine the adequacy of current protections for U.S. citizens' constitutional and civil rights. That would certainly cover, if indeed there are, as you suggest,